Hi everyone, welcome. I am Shuresh Ghimire, Extension Vegetable Specialist with University of Connecticut. I'm here today with my colleague Matt DeBacco. Matt wears multiple hats at times. Matt himself is a farmer, has grown the largest pumpkin in the state a couple times. As far as I know, he also works with fellow farmers. And teaches horticulture related courses at UConn. Today we'll be talking about something that's on a lot of growers' mind right now. It's about early season pest management. And thank you all for joining. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so Matt and I thought it would be helpful to just have a conversation and hit some of the common questions we get in early seasons. Things like which pests to watch for, any changes in pesticide options for this season, and scouting strategies that actually work in the field, not just talking on paper. So that is the goal of our meeting today. And we will also touch on cultural practices as part of management to keep the pest pressure down. And at the end, we'll share some go-to resources for growers for making informed decision. Let's get started, Matt.
Excellent, Josh. Well, thanks for organizing this. Those listening or watching may have seen me or heard me out in your fields doing some scouting here. So hopefully I can bring some of that knowledge here at the beginning of the season, where we can hopefully be preventative with some of our actions and plans to reduce the chance of having those problems as the season essentially progresses. So. All right. So with that, I've got a slideshow that we'll be presenting. So those that are watching on video, I will also make the slides available with resources there as well. So you can access those. If not, you can follow along. It is a pretty extensive slide deck. So just give me a couple seconds here and I'll get that up and we'll get right into it.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. We thought slideshow would be better as we could show some pictures when it comes to identifying pests. So the idea of having video as opposed to just talking is to help growers identify some of the pests mainly.
Right, give me 1 second. Let me get this full screen for everyone. Try that again. How about that monitor?
Looks good at my
That
end.
looks better. Okay, excellent. I'm looking off to the side. I got two monitors, so making sure everyone looks good here. All right. All right. So again, welcome everyone. Hope is this will be a nice informative kind of early season before the real problems get started. And this is all possible through your local agents here at the University of Connecticut Extension Office. And we're kind of here willing to help and always, out in the field ourselves. So you may not catch us right away, but we're out in the field there to try to bring in some of that most current knowledge from the year, the season, or the local weather event, as we all know we experience during the growing season. So first off here, for our general topics, there are going to be 9 main topics that we're going to go over, and this is going to start with those early season pest pressures, and this will be dedicated or focused, I should say, on mainly tomato and cucurbit growers for the most part, though this does apply to many other crops, but those are going to kind of be our focuses for this year going forward as well, to really try to bring you some fact sheets too, which I'll mention a little bit at the end. New pesticide label changes for 2025, those I could find that at least were here registered for Connecticut. Plant scouting tips. So number 3 is an important one. You're going to hear me refer back to that. If I've been out in the field, being a good scouter is really important to catch those problems early. And going right along with that, number 4, making sure you're not missing any of those key signs to allow you to identify those problems early, because it's so much easier to control things if you catch them early. Cultural practice to help keep early season pests kind of in check, kind of some ideas and tips there. Advice when it comes to rotating insecticides and kind of what those different numbers and letter codes actually mean. We don't want to forget those that want to go a biological route or try to be on that organic side of things. So I'm going to give you some hopefully tips and suggestions there as well for number 7. Key decisions after transplanting to stay ahead of pests and problems. Because once you get those plants from the greenhouse or maybe the hoop house and out into the field or out into the high tunnel, trying to increase your odds of success, at least that starting point. And then lastly, just some kind of resources in addition to us here at UConn Extension. You can kind of look at, research, and kind of bounce some ideas off and look at some different images and pictures. So that's the main goal. I know a lot to cover, but hopefully will be a exciting amount here and good depth of knowledge for everything. So looking at our first one, early season pests for tomato cucurbit growers, what should we be on the lookout for now? And this is going to, of course, focus on maybe a little bit favoring this year, which has been a slow start. So some of these is actually a good thing. If you're hearing about them now, you can go out today and do a quick inspection. You might be seeing them if you're keeping records, which I'll mention, kind of look back, and we're a little bit behind, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because, well, everyone's behind, just the weather. One key one that's usually one of the first ones to show up here is flea beetles. And this is kind of the best kind of image I could give you as far as what you're typically going to see. There's a lot of images you can search online and find all sorts of images, but when you're looking at the field, I know it's a little bit more advanced, but you see that just that surface chewing, if you will. Yeah, literally that epidermal, that surface layer kind of damage there, typically maybe a little more concentrated around the margins, around the edges of the leaf, and they kind of work their way in. And there's these look like little black dots. I know it's always great in the images. They look like these giant things, but be mindful of just those little surface almost scratches what they start. Yes, they can progress to holes, but those surface scratches. How to go about preventing these? Well, as you'll hear throughout for a lot of these pests, utilizing row covers and seedlings is a really great way because you're actually acting as a physical barrier, especially at the seedling stage. No, we don't want to really see these in the adult stage really either in the plants, but the adult stage plants are a lot more tolerant. There are, of course, chemical control options, pyrethroids, pyrethrins there as well. There's some potentially systemic options. I'm going to preface everything that I kind of suggest here is always check the labels, check the products. Labels do change, as we'll talk about later. Sometimes they expand the label, and sometimes it becomes more restricted. And the key part there is monitoring your fields. Look for those like little shot hole, kind of like someone took a shotgun to that there, especially in those early plants, because these tend to be one of the first ones that you'll go about and you'll see. Cutworms, this is another one, little kind of maybe gross looking, and literally they are properly named. They are cutworms because literally they're like the little beavers of the plant world there. They will cut down the plants literally at the ground level or sometimes just below that ground level. They tend to take on this very C-shaped kind of shape when they get disturbed. They kind of like roll up in a little ball. They do a lot of their feeding at night. So when it comes to scouting, if you're always scouting in the morning or during the day or right before you end, you may not see these, but you come back the next day and you might see the evidence or the damage that they have done. You're like, how did I miss that? Well, these are definitely more active at night. When it comes to management, again, plowing the fields, kind of exposing those larvae to predators, churning up the soil, I know may not be the best thing when it comes to necessarily soil management, but if you've had a cutworm problem for sure, this can be one way culturally by just mixing the soil and bringing them to the surface that you can reduce this population. As always, there are chemical options, which again would be recommended to be sprayed in the evening, not the morning. So a lot of times we say low light, which is true. We want these more to be the evening because they're going to be more active at night. And of course, monitor the areas, look for issues, look for problems. You dig around where that plant, and you're probably going to find they're not going to go very far, but they are not necessarily going to be sitting on top like this perfect image shows during the day where you're going to find them. My guessing is there might be a flash involved with this because they are most active at night. Aphids, so we went from cutworms are gigantic in retrospect, 1 to 2 inches long. Now we go to aphids, really, really small. But what they lack in size, they definitely make up for in numbers. And these are piercing, sucking insects. So literally they puncture the plant and they pull out essentially the sugars from the plant and they basically dehydrate it, capture all the sugars, and essentially, unfortunately, can kill the entire plant. In addition, they can also transmit diseases, particularly viruses. So that is a area of concern. And while in the field, they tend to transmit their viruses more mid and late season. In the greenhouse, if you have a resident population, you could be having a resident population of your own, unfortunately, viruses that could be vectoring, losing your seedlings, and putting your entire season in jeopardy. You're going to hear about this a little bit later. I'm going to show you a picture of what's called reflective mulches, which are basically plastic mulches that are like a mirror that basically reflect the sun and confuse them, because as we can see in the image here, they're on the underside of the leaves. They don't like the sun, so they go to the underside. Well, if it's reflecting, they think the sun's on both sides, and ideally they fly away and don't bother your plants at all. Scouting is very important. They are small, so we want to be very diligent with our scouting. They look gigantic when you zoom in, but kind of put the thumbnail and picture there for their general size comparison. Then looking at some of our diseases, kind of the biggest one early in the season, there'll be plenty later in the season. Damping off, which is kind of a combination of like a Pythium, Rhizoctonia, Fusarium. Those all are different diseases, but they kind of coalesce in this damping off. And that really is, unfortunately, these poor seedlings have this soil-borne fungi that's basically, they've emerged and they're basically being collared, it's called. They're basically being choked off at the soil level. They flop over and unfortunately end up shriveling and dying. Not a good thing. Most of the time, this is encouraged by cool, wet soils, particularly Pythium rhizoctonia. And basically, you see that here, that cutting off the xylem and phloem, the seedling falls over and unfortunately doesn't recover. So keep that in mind. Sterile potting media, not reusing potting media, using fresh potting media, one that hasn't been sitting around open for a long period of time. That's a great kind of initial way. If you're a large-scale grower and you have this, you're noticing this on one flat, there are, of course, fungicides that can be utilized. Be careful with them. They limited effectiveness depending on the amount of damping off you have present in your starting medium there. And then once you see one, dig down a little bit, because if you look at just the top of the plants, they actually look pretty good. This is key right at that soil line, or sometimes just above or just below. So if you see a seedling just fall over and it looks normal and it just wilts down unexpectedly, dig down, you might find that stem kind of basically rotting at that soil line. So those are the key insects and diseases to kind of keep an eye out for. With those, I mentioned some control products. So, of course, I want to get into potentially some of the new changes to pesticide labels for the year 2025 here. This is, constantly evolving and changing, even for the year. We think always January 1st, it'll all be new and different. Keep in mind, these do constantly change. So for tomatoes in particular, why reinvent the wheel to some extent? North Carolina University has put out a great spray guide for tomatoes. Now, keep in mind, is North Carolina. We are seeing, of course, warmer temperatures over longer periods of time. So they've got a pretty good idea or schedule of what they recommend, more so for the commercial growers for their chemical products. I included a couple images right here. I liked it because it was nice. It was colorized. It gives you the common names. It gives you the kind of name brand names, their different programs, the different weeks you should be applying things. So this is really good just to keep in mind if you've had a problem, to kind of know what week or when that occurs. If some of these are new to you or unfamiliar, something definitely to take a look at. And now would be a great time, we're talking end of April, early May, would be a great time to start to purchase some of these, because I know every year when the disease comes in and everyone's, I want to go grab, I don't have that. Let me go buy that now. Well, supply and demand. So if you can get some of these on hand and keep them in a cool, dark place, a lot of times they will be good for multiple years. So don't think that these are only active. I want to buy them in June because they're going to degrade. Yes, we don't want to keep things extended periods of time, but at the same time, a lot of these would be fine to keep for a year, as long as a lot of particularly the liquids don't freeze. Chlorothianil, very, very common one. There's a lot of knockoff brands of that. The most famous one is Bravo, is its common name. There's also, I believe, many other knockoff brands there. So you want to read that little fine print on some of the labels there. Mancozeb, some coppers, very, very common. Switch, of course, is a fungicide there. It's a combination of actually two things, Inspire Super. So we see a lot of ors or options. So just something to take a look at. But I'm not saying you got to buy all these. I'm not sponsored by anyone either, but just things to keep on hand, or at least keep this on hand if you know you got a problem. For those not interested in the chemicals and want to have some chemical alternatives, I know this is small, but luckily I provided the links and you'll have the access to the slide set so you can zoom in. At the top here, they list all the wonderful diseases your tomatoes can get, and then some of the products that are, fall into that category. And it gives the active ingredients and then their common names. I know what a lot of people use, a lot of growers, and they like double nickel, for example. That's a bacillus species here. You can kind of see what that covers. Soil guards, let's see, some other fixed coppers, sulfur. Again, nothing wrong with sometimes good old sulfur for certain diseases, but if you know you're getting other diseases, well, you could be spraying and wondering why you're still getting it. Well, it just doesn't really work very effective for that. So again, keep that in mind. For those early season starts, which I know you may have started already, but root shield can be incorporated into the soil or medium. So that's a great way to kind of pre-inoculate with a beneficial. Something to consider there. When we're talking about these new products, I also want to just make note that some of them do change and sometimes they're permitted and not permitted. So I'm not sure. There's a lot of manufacturers, a lot of different commercial names that this kind of goes by. But as of June 30th, 2025 is the last date when the use of existing stocks can be permitted. So if you're looking at going to buy this ahead of June, you probably won't find it. But if you do have this on hand, keep in mind that after June 30th, it's basically the label changes where it becomes very restrictive. Existing stocks, again, can be used up into this date. After that, you'd kind of be in violation. So keep that in mind. I believe this label will continue for asparagus going forward. But up until that, if you have any of this on hand, now would be the time to spray it up until June 30th of 2025, because that is the official day the label is changing. So keep this in mind. Look at some new products. Again, I haven't field tested any of these. They looked interesting at least. I've got 2 here that are insecticides. They're available in the US for tomato growers. Again, some of them launched in 2023. I'm trying to give you the best name I can. Looking down at this active ingredient, as all products have, that's really where you want to look. This is, of course, the name brand. What I liked about this one is it's really targeting hornworms and armyworms, those kind of chewing pests, which really can do a lot of damage to your plants. I quoted some numbers here, but really looking at if you have a lot of problem with those chewing hornworms and armyworms, and this could be for tomatoes, of course, but there's other vegetables listed in addition to lettuce and sweet corn. So great to have a product that you could potentially spray on multiple crops. So you have to have individual products for individual plants. Not always possible, but in this case, it looks like it is. And then Servento, here, another insecticide. This is for sucking insects, so the aphids and whiteflies and thrips, definitely for tomatoes here. It is established potentially in prior years, so this is not necessarily brand new for 2025, but I believe they expanded the label for 2025. So you may have been able to apply this on other crops, but now you can apply it for targeting aphids, whiteflies, and thrips specifically in tomatoes. And that's why you want to keep these things in mind. The labels, the laws we'll hear later, but checking these out, taking a picture of these is also great. Writing these down somewhere of your name brand. And if you can kind of sketch out the extremely long chemical ingredient, you can see sometimes there is a lot of similarities and crossovers. So just a few things potentially to add to your lineup going forward. Now, how do you know what to spray? How do you look at things? Well, I wanted to give you some scouting tips because I figured this nice early in the season, being prepared for your scouting, having a strategy, knowing how to inspect, all of these things come into play here. So first off, preparation, timing. Early in the morning, pests can be less active, especially the cool mornings. We had a very cool morning this morning. That can be an issue. Avoid the midday heat. A lot of bugs things got to go away. And also really bright sun can make it hard to see some fungal issues potentially. That can mask symptoms. The plants can be more wilty. So again, keep in mind the time that you're scouting as well. You want to be scouting at least once a week. Flowering, fruit sets, different stages of development is going to cause potentially some more stresses. It might encourage some problems to develop. What should you kind of walk out in the field? Yes, by all means, you can just walk out and look. The best fertilizer is, the footsteps of the farmer, shall we say. But tools, particularly for these smaller pests, a little hand lens, at least 10x magnification. I tend to like 30 or 40x. Particularly for those really small insects, those thrips, those spider mites, very, very small. But at least a 10x does make it a little bit easier. It also focuses you on certain areas. A notebook or an app, a notes app would work just fine. A camera or phone taking pictures. Again, always good to capture that image. And I wouldn't just say take a picture of the infected part. Try to get a little broader as well. That can really be helpful if I'm going through and doing a diagnosis for you. If you're in a greenhouse protected area, sticky traps or yellow cards can be a great way. Soil moisture, knowing the wet spots and dry spots in a field. Pruning shears or knife, if you got to cut something out or look at discoloration, you kind of go through and cut something, you can look at kind of the transverse cut, see if there's any discoloration on the internals. All great things. Or a quick knife would be great as well. Also, knowing what diseases, if you're a new grower at this, knowing what pests and diseases are common in your area. I'm not saying you will have a novel disease. A lot of times you've got at least the common ones. They're common for a reason. Scouting strategy, you want to be random. I know we all have our own little favorite and our patterns and our crops we want to check on. Not just walking down a row. I know we all do it. That's fine. But when we're doing a true scouting, on a diagonal, on a zigzag, or a diamond, some way that you're avoiding some sort of bias. Because sometimes in one row, maybe you went down with the fertilizer spreader twice or not at all. You kind of want to look at multiple rows if you are growing at that scale. At least 10 to 20 plants. I always say, sometimes we'll be walking in the field and people are like, well, what's wrong with this one? And I'll say, in all honesty, that's why you grow more than one. There might be something wrong with that one plant, but we're looking more at, if it's happening to one, keep an eye on the neighboring plants. Oh, it's now happening to 2 or 3. That becomes a greater concern. Hotspot monitoring, as I said, if you see an area that you know is either wet or dry or a low spot or a high spot or a change in pH, or when you were mixing the fertilizer, you tipped over the spreader in that one area, just things to keep in mind there. Hotspot monitoring, so keep in mind where it might be initially forming. And then borders or adjacent areas, are you changing fields? Are you changing soil conditions? Are you changing crop rotations? All those things come into play. What to inspect? I know it seems obvious. Well, of course, we'll look at the plant. We want to look at the leaves, but you want to look at the upper and the underside of the leaves. The color and texture. Texture is a little tough to do by video or camera, but just how does it feel? And as you grow these plants more and more, you'll start to get an idea what they should be. If you are trying new varieties, keep in mind, because that could cause some issues. They might be a little funky. Some of the older, maybe heirloom varieties of tomatoes, they can have kind of weird leaves. Nothing wrong with them. They just look a little strange. For cucurbits, there's some of the squashes that have white spots on the leaves that look like powdery mildew, but it's just a natural occurrence of that variety. So just keep that in mind. The stems is always, we want to take a look at the stems, the integrity of the stems, the all 360 view of the stems. For tomato growers, I know a lot of you are growing grafted plants. We want to be mindful of that graft union there, and also be looking at that area for our cutworms as well. That's where they'll typically start. Specific signs to watch out for. Again, it's between signs and symptoms. Signs is kind of like includes any part of the pathogen itself. The symptom is what you're going to see as a grower. Oh, it looks like it's wilting, or it looks like there's kind of a white spot there causing a little brown coloration to leaves, where when you see the actual pathogen, typically don't with the aid of a microscope, that's going to be your true sign. And with our pests, I wish it was really easy, but there's insects. You can find the actual insect, that's the best. Or secondary signs, there are frasts or droppings, chewed leaves. Trapping is a great way because you don't have to be there 24/7. They'll get trapped there and you can go and back the card. For diseases, there could be bacterial fungal diseases, there could be viral diseases, there could be weather symptoms that lead to deficiencies, nutrient deficiencies, particularly nitrogen and calcium for tomatoes, nitrogen for cucurbits and potassium, and then environmental stresses. So I know all of this makes it seem like, why would I ever want to grow anything? Because it's going to die. If there's 8,000 things that can kill it. These are just good to keep in mind. And if you can classify something, if you know you've got an insect pest, well, don't bother spraying a fungicide. That's not going to do anything. So this is why we try to classify them there. How do we go about making these analysis, and how do you go about writing down these observations? Record keeping in some way, shape, or form. It doesn't mean you have to do it one way or have to do it another way. Do it in some form, and pick a way that's going to be utilizing for you that you're actually going to do. Are you just going to take a picture from the same row or the same corner of the field every week, every Monday? Pick a day, doesn't matter. Some people really like these big giant calendars, and they literally write down, oh, the tomatoes didn't look great, or the lower field of the lettuce was looking more yellow than it should. Again, if that works, great. If you're going a larger field, taking pictures, a quick sketch of a map, oh, it's in this corner. It doesn't have to be professional, just so you know you can go back to that area. A lot of your cameras, take pictures, there's a GPS mark in there. In the properties, you'll find that. You can go back to that same location. Looking at trends, again, weekly data, consult experts. We're here to help, but the more data you can provide us, the better diagnose we can provide you. Looking at actions, well, immediate response, for remove heavily infested plants, tag, bag, remove, ideally would be great. Determine if there's a threshold. If one leaf doesn't look good, don't decimate the whole variety. Keep an eye on that. Come back to that area the next day. Did it get worse? If I remove that leaf, does it spread? We want to use IPM practices where possible. Again, that does not mean no spray per se, but we're going to try to do other things first. We're going to try to mitigate the problem that way. And then for long-term preyings, if we see an issue now, crop rotations are ways to try to prevent that occurring next year. I know here we are, we haven't even started the season, but it's never too late to plan for next year. Other tips, again, just be aware of the weather. Do you need a whole, monitoring weather conditions? No. Train your workers, they're going to be the ones that are in the field. They're going to get their hands dirty, not that you won't be, but there's just more eyes. Let them know what to look out for. Let them know that they can come to you with potential issues or problems. The more eyes you have, the better. Good weed control, that's always a great way. Remove them because they can harvest pests, particularly on edges of fields or things like that. Just mowing those down can be great. Seasonal adjustments. We're in the seedling stage, then we'll go to plant growth stage, and then we'll go to fruit set stage. Things to consider. If you really want to get fancy, look at using the technology and drones for bigger images and larger field scales. Not that you have to do that, but the technology is available. And if someone's using it in the neighboring field, you've got a big field, you can have them fly over and just take a picture. Good for comparison purposes. Common mistakes, I always said bias towards healthy plants. That you don't want to realize that or admit that there's a problem. So you kind of always look at the healthy ones and go, it's fine. There's just one over there. Be mindful of that. Ignore subtle signs. So in this image here, we see there's different green colorations, different shadings of green. Looks like the lower regions here definitely looks like a little more yellow. Might be nitrogen deficient. Might be a chance of a disease. Again, keep that in your mind. Inconsistent scouting, you always walk down the same field, too consistent or inconsistent. Either you walk down the same field, look at the same plants, or you're kind of going through and doing it today, and then you wait 10 days, and then you wait 12 days, and you do it in 2 days. And so consistency is a great thing. And then we don't want to forget about the soil as much as the environment, those poor draining spots, as we all know fields have. So kind of put this in perspective here. Again, grab a magnifying tool if you can. They're really small. They fit in your pocket. They're pretty indestructible. You can kind of sit on them. They won't really damage them. So keep that in mind, that it's a great way to look for particularly those small pests. Inspect the roots to soil, not just the foliage, unless if you see a problem. I know it's kind of like the old, are the carrots ready yet? Well, you got to sacrifice one and pull one out. Take a look at it. Scout at different times, particularly in the morning. Dew can sometimes encourage or have fungal issues, maybe be a little more masked depending. Apps or journals to log observations, spot trends, and combine scouting in the field with your soil test to confirm nutrient, pH, potential issues. Or if you know this field really wasn't ready, I did lime it a little bit. Let's see how it looks. Let's see what kind of happens there. So if you keep those in mind, that hopefully will get you through a lot of the potential issues before they become big issues. So what are things growers miss? So that's all the generals of scouting, but what might someone miss as they go through a field? And I always say, don't forget the importance of a soil test. I know they're a pain to do. I know they can take some time, some organization, but the results you get are actually worth it. And a lot of growers may look at this and go, I see a bunch of bars, I see a bunch of numbers. It doesn't really mean anything to me. Well, a lot of times if I see an issue, I might refer to the grower and say, hey, do you have a soil test for that field? Because I can look at this with what you've told me and try to put two things together. Now we want to be in this optimum category. So we see this field here, calcium, phosphorus, potassium, definitely below optimum with a pH of 5, 6. So there's going to be, I would suspect, potentially some issues for this. But we don't want to be in the above optimum or excess. It's just kind of a over adding of things. And micronutrients, don't worry too much about them. We really focus on pH and those macronutrients. And why do I like this term optimum? What's the target to shoot for? Well, this is kind of what we're looking at, this graphical analysis here of below optimum and above optimum. Here at optimum, basically, you're going to get the optimum yield. You're going to have the best yield you're going to get. Well, if you go above optimum, the problem is you're adding more inputs, more cost, and not getting any return on investment. And sometimes you can even go toxic, where you added way too much that you're actually decreasing, which is the worst situation to be in because you've added the labor, added the fertilizer, added the cost, and your yield are actually going down. So you want to try to be targeting that optimum range. Again, and it is a range, not just a number. The reason why I say that soil pH is so important, as we can kind of see here, the wider the bars, the more available it is, the thinner the bars, the less available it is. In most of these, if we kind of look around that 6.5-ish range, most of these are going to be most readily available. Now, if we're growing at a pH of 5, you're like, 5 to 6, pretty close. One, it's a logarithmic scale, so keep that in mind that it's exponentially more every pH bump that you move. And even at pH 5, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur, calcium, magnesium all become much, much less available. What the interesting one is iron. It becomes more available at the acidic pHs. And if you're growing blueberries, you want to keep that acidic. Blueberries like their iron. They do need their other nutrients, but they really like their iron, so it makes sense that they should be more acidic. Also, phosphorus does this weird thing. A lot of growers point this out. It's like fat, then it gets thin, then it gets fat again. It changes forms on there. So 8.5 is actually more detrimental than 9.5 or 7.5, specific for phosphorus. You can see others definitely have waning amounts of availability. So what's the benefit of the soil test? Well, the goal really for you is to really improve your crops, address deficiencies, maximize your outputs. At the same time, you're also saving money or reducing your total input cost. So adding lime, sometimes I had one grower, I went through, looked at his soil test, he kept buying fertilizer and fertilizer every year. I said, this year, take half the budget, don't buy the fertilizer, just buy lime. Lo and behold, I was lucky. His yields improved greatly. However, I did tell him the following year that now you got to go back to buying your fertilizer. You can't buy lime every year because then you'll make it too basic and it'll cause other issues. So being able to read those soil tests, sometimes just seeing that, the more you see, the better, can really help you long-term, save some money and maximize your yields. It also supports that precision agriculture in the sense that if you have one field that's really acidic and one that's more neutral, well, maybe you only have to fertilize or lime the acidic one, and that can really save your total inputs and costs there. The environmental benefits. So again, we want to prevent environmental harm. We don't want to be the ones contaminating the environment. We want to monitor soil health. These are all great ways to be a responsible applicant, whatever you're applying. Yes, maybe adding lime isn't necessarily the end of the world. It's mined fairly locally, but why would you just add something to the environment that's not going to cause a benefit, and at high amounts could cause runoff and could cause potential other issues? So be mindful. We want to have nice, healthy soils, nice, healthy roots, leading to nice, healthy plants as well. Again, early nutrient deficiencies, what are you commonly going to see? NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. I will say nitrogen is probably your most common one. You may see a little magnesium as we get a little later in the season, but nitrogen, I would say, would be number one as far as the early season goes. Boron, copper, zinc, yes, they do occur. I will admit, I don't see them very often. I haven't seen them, but definitely focus on your nitrogen, maybe your potassium later in the season, but this is going to be really the one you're looking for. And those are going to be yellowing leaves on the lower end of the plant. So again, be mindful of the others, but focus on the nitrogen in particular. Other soil-related issues, we can't avoid things like compaction and poor drainage in addition to pH. We want good, healthy roots because they make good, healthy shoots. These can be hard to spot without a soil test or root inspection. Again, if you look at just after a rain or particularly a light rain, you might be able to see those wet and dry spots. Good to kind of document, the left side of the field, the back part of the field, you as a grower to know. Compaction there, we can definitely see it restricting our roots growth. Restricting your roots growth is going to restrict your top growth as well. Look for those hidden pests. When I say hidden, they're there, but a lot of growers will inspect the plants and go right by. This happens a lot with spider mites, potentially root aphids, small larvae. If you're seeing this leaf doesn't look quite right. Yes, when it gets to this stage, you might say, oh yeah, there's definitely something wrong. And these are both evidence of spider mite damage, which are these little teeny tiny dots suspended in a web. So keep that in mind that we want to catch them at this stage and look at the underside of the leaves, not wait until it gets to this stage when they're really hard to control. Heart of the heart problems is looking for uniform problems where the whole row has an issue. It kind of all just looks sick or it looks off. Those can be really hard to spot because they all look the same. It's a little easier when one or two look a little odd. You can focus in that area, but sometimes the whole row. That could be just an issue with that field in its entirety. That could be an issue with the planting. That could be an issue with something for that whole row. A little hard to spot, but something to keep in mind. And that's why records and images are a great tool. Lean to our cultural practices to can help keep these pests in check. Might be a little late even for this as earlier in the season, but hot water seed treatments, heat treating your seeds can be a great way to prevent and control, mitigate by a lot of, this hot water treatment on your seeds. There are certain temperatures and minute durations. You don't necessarily need a hot, water fancy bath here. It is great because it is dialed in, it is controlled, it is consistent, because if you go too hot for too long, you could kill all your seeds. If you go too cold for too short, it may not do anything. So great way to treat your seeds, great way to eliminate the prevention of some of these seed-borne issues that could occur. As I mentioned before, the row covers, again, covering your alliums for leaf miner, row cover garlic. I know we're a little bit beyond that, but March and April before their emergence, kind of making sure they're all sealed up. The hoops are all in place, can actually make it a little warmer. Again, we're looking at those miners here. We're looking at these little dots that they form. That's a sign they've already been there. Again, a little late at that point, but good to make note to plan for the following year. My weed control, I mentioned it before. Here we see the hay down. We see some plastic down. Remember, there are different options for mulch selection. There's different colors. Now, you can get really crazy. There's yellow and red and blue and all these other colors. But for the standard ones that I see in the fields, most growers using would be black, the reflective, or the white. Now, I say the black is probably the cheapest, and that's probably the most widely used. The silver, and I say silver or chrome, you don't want gray. Gray is the color gray. This is super bright, super reflective, great for reducing your aphids. And then your white mulches here can help cool the soil down, particularly if your plants are going to be small for an extended period of time. The downfall with all of these, again, there's a pros and cons. These are great for weed suppression. They're great for, keeping things in nice rows. The end of season disposal, of course, is an issue, something we also need to be mindful and considerate of. But if you know you've had a weed problem in an area, these can be a great tool. If you're in an area with a lot of nut sedge, I hate to tell you, a lot of these plastics, these 1 mil, even embossed plastic, a lot of those can punch right through. So there are biodegradable options as well. If you're having those problems, they're a lot thicker, a lot tougher. But just things to consider that not only within our plastic, there's different colors, there's also different classifications of these weed suppression materials. And those reflective mulches, again, I tried to get a picture. It's a little hard to come across on the camera. They are very bright. I would highly recommend you put them down on a cloudy day and still wear sunglasses because they reflect a lot of light. So they can also make your plants when they're young, like at this stage, look very different. They will look very yellow. They're not yellow, but they look yellow because they're getting light from the top and from the bottom, almost like a see-throughness. So don't panic and think you've got a nitrogen deficiency all of a sudden if you're using these type of mulches. Now, what about when we cause insecticides? Those are going to be our first things, usually to show up, usually before diseases. What advice can I give you? Well, knowing the product, knowing the timing is key. So it goes back to what pest are you trying to control? I know we're probably maybe not looking at necessarily Japanese beetle suppression, but I kind of like this graph. It looked really good. You could see when they're going through their winter grubs, when they're feeding, when they're pupating, when they're adults, when they're going through their grub root feeding, and when they're basically going dormant again. Knowing what stage of development they're in, knowing when to target them is key. And also that timing. I like the picture here. The person looks like they're holding the sun. Well, that's just because of perfect timing there. And this will help make your products a lot more effective. And why should we rotate insecticides? And I will go through some of the product codes, shall we say, but just we want to prevent resistance. So my little picture here, if we've got a bunch of bugs, we spray them all, most of them die, but these red bugs, for whatever reason, have a resistance gene. And this is just because there's just so many of them, there's just genetic variability. Then they come back again, we're like, oh, let's spray them again, and now we're selecting for, in this case, those red bugs. So we want to be mindful of that, particularly of aphids and whiteflies that can really develop resistance and have high numbers. Keep that in mind. There's also broad spectrum protection. Different insecticides target different species. There's also context versus systemic. Are they targeting the eggs or the larvae or the adults? Just be mindful of what you're spraying. If you're catching them very early at the egg and larval stage and your product works on adults, not going to be any good. So beneficial insects, ladybugs, parasitic wasps can be great to rotate in because we want to minimize our harm to our beneficial insects, such as our bees. And then, of course, regulatory compliance. There's the restrictions of how many times you can use a product. So you can't just buy one and use it all year. there's certain either number of applications that are restriction or amount of active ingredient per square foot. Keep those in mind. What principles? So when I say rotate, are you just grabbing a different product name? Well, maybe, but you really want to be looking at the rock code or the mode of action. So some of them will be nerve poisons, some will be growth regulators, some might be a metabolic disruptor. They work on different components. And these typically are represented by this insecticide resistance action committee. And they start to label things differently with group numbers and also letters. And you want to rotate by essentially frac code or the coding here, not just saying the name, because two insecticides from the same name or fungicides with the same name may have the same or similar active ingredient. We want to try where we can to use selective insecticides. So these are very narrow spectrum. They're not going to work on a lot of things, but they're going to focus on a few things. And if that's what your problem is, this is what you should be utilizing. BT or Bacillus thuringiensis is great for caterpillars like tomato hornworms without harming pollinators. It's very selective for that. But if you're applying this now for hornworms, there's no hornworms out yet. So you don't want to be utilizing this now. You're just wasting your time, wasting the product. Crop rotations, this is a great non-chemical way, kind of if you have the ability to kind of take 4 fields and kind of rotate them with leafy grown plants like cabbage and kale. And then the next year you rotate with root grown, such as your carrots, your onions, your parsnips maybe. And then you grow your tomatoes, which I know everyone wants to just grow tomatoes everywhere because of the profit return. Summer squash, those are kind of in the same category of the fruit category. And then your legumes, kind of your lentils, your cowpeas, and things like that. That would be the ideal 4-year rotation. In addition to removing your crop residues at the end of the year, using biological controls when possible, and those row covers as a physical barrier can all lend things in your favor. Practical steps for rotation. So identifying the target pest, knowing what stage of development it's in, because a lot of your products may target them at really specific time points. So if you have a product for adults and you've got the end-star stages, it's not going to be any good. So that's key for rotation, is utilizing the product that's most effective for the stage your insects are actively exhibiting. Now these IRAC classifications here, again, there's a bunch of numbers and letters. I tried to put a pretty picture here, looking at what they tackle is they're tackling nerve and muscle development, looking at, growth and development, nerve and muscle contraction, respiration, or are they kind of like non-specific? Again, just an example here. I try to pick the most common ones for tomatoes. 1B, 3A, 4A, 5, and the pyrethrins, which I mentioned before. There can be lipid, which is basically fat inhibitors. So a lot of these, again, focus on more sucking insects versus feeding insects. So keep those in mind. Caterpillars, for example, there are these different numbers and codings for a reason to ensure you're rotating amongst modes of action. When you plan rotations, again, I'm just giving you an example of every week. Every 7 to 10 days-ish is usually the typical recommended spray schedule. You're looking at those seasonal controls, rotating within season, but to get that multi-season control, you're also looking at adjusting pest pressures. You're also looking at making those long-term rotations to reduce the buildup or accumulation of certain pests. As I said before, the label's the law. Adhere to the maximum number of applications or replication intervals. Check pre-harvest intervals. If I spray today, can I go harvest it tomorrow? Keep that in mind. Some could have very long post-harvest intervals. I mean, if I sprayed this product today, imidacloprid, 21 days later, I could start to harvest the crop. Well, I need to harvest it next week for market. Legally, I cannot do that looking at what the label says. So those are also important things to keep in mind. Monitoring results. So again, after each application, scout, not the next day, it might take a day or two. 3 to 7 days later, assess your control. At that point, determine, oh, they're still here. No, grab the same product again. Maybe you have to rotate to a different product. Oh, now they're in the adult stage. I killed all the larvae, but now I've got to go through and do the adult. That's where sticky traps can be effective. Great. If you're looking at large-scale operations, calibrating your spray nozzles is really important because that will allow you to be very efficient with your coverage. So again, it might sound dumb, but just changing out the nozzles can really change the effectiveness of certain products. So have different ones on hand for different situations or products you might be applying. There's also your local resources. So again, consult local resources. For here, it's Yukon Extension. We see a lot, I always say I get better as the season goes on because I get to see more farms, get to see more ideas, see what other people are doing and help offer those as suggestions as well as my own. Other things, other times. So for example, Florida, I know maybe not local here, but some of those insecticides Their insects, particularly their whiteflies, developed resistance to the neonicotinoids. They basically become rotation from group 23 to group 28. So they're selecting now, you might want to choose this one because this other one has resistance issues. Basically, they have immunity to that particular mode of action. Additional considerations. So I know we like to spray once in the field, so a lot of tank mixing. If you mix it in a jar before, shake it up and let it sit. Sometimes you'll get this separation, which of course would not be good. You want to see it stay homogenized, stay kind of consistent throughout. Resistant management, as I said, keep things in rotation. Be mindful of the environment. Spray during cooler parts of the day. It'll be usually more effective for the insects because they come out. Also, less stress on the actual plants. Log each insecticide you use. You have to do that anyway if you're spraying on crops. But just get into the habit of making sure, oh, remember, no, write it down. Write it down. Have a set calendar that you're going to be writing that down at. And beneficial insect preservation, as always, and use selective options to hopefully keep our beneficial bees and parasitic insects and our ladybugs and our green lacewings, hopefully keeping their populations high to reduce our pest population. I gave an example of rotation. Again, this is just meant to be kind of an idea of mapping out your growing season by week. You don't have to do it by day, but just by week kind of gives you this 12 weeks. This gives you about that good solid 3 months or so to kind of have those aphids and whiteflies to hornworms to particularly could be armyworms at the end of the season. So just having an idea of rotating and what you should be rotating. You see all different numbers here. And that's the goal, is to have always something different that targets the specific insect I'm expecting. What are some common mistakes when we do this? Well, rotating by brand name. Oh, it's a different name. It's got to be a different fungicide, insecticide. Look at the active ingredient. We also don't want to overuse broad spectrum insecticides because they kind of do a little bit of everything, but they don't do anything well. If we know we've got spider mites, pick a spider mite one. If we know we've got aphids, pick an aphid one. Don't ignore the life stages. Oh, do I have the little nymphs or do I have the adults? Because that can influence what product you're going to choose. And of course, don't neglect scouting. Do it on a fixed schedule so you're catching these problems early because they're a lot easier to control. General final tips for this category: stay updated. Test new products, balance IPM, talk with other growers, talk with us if we're seeing something that's being utilized or working really effective or not working effective. For my cucurbit growers, every year when downy mildew comes in, it's always difficult to assess what strain has come in, what products work the best. Sometimes the expensive products work, sometimes the cheap products work. Trying to have that communication that does exist. And just knowing how to read a pesticide label, knowing the key aspects highlighted here, really good for you to be an informed applicator. Looking at biological options, again, if we're not looking at the chemical options, what are some biological options? And you can really start with like cover crops, just not even targeting anything in particular, being a little more of a generalist, building that soil health. Musters are great with fungal insect pressures. I give you a link here. This is a free, I forget how many pages. It's extensive. This is a really large book. You could purchase it, but they also have a free download or a free viewing area. So really great to learn about. Oh, I've heard someone using this, or I'm considering using that. This can give you a little background so you don't have a mess of your field. Knowing how to manage it can be really effective so you don't get frustrated with it later. Those beneficial insects, again, timing has to be right, particularly with nematodes and certain bacteria and just other beneficials in general. People say they don't work. Well, sometimes the timing is a little off. Knowing what to look for. I always like the green lacewing eggs. They kind of look these little like lollipops hanging way up, so they're very unique and distinctive. Recognizing some of these bugs because these are the bugs we want to see. These are the natural enemies to a lot of your predators, or these are predators, I should say, to a lot of the pests that you're going to be dealing with. So knowing what the good ones are, seeing these is actually a good thing for you. Planting trap plants. So here we see our cash crop and our trap plants. Looking at the field, the perimeter, particularly my cucurbit growers, will be planted with Blue Hubbard. Jude Boucher was one of the first ones at UConn who did a lot of research on these, many, many years ago. And the key part with these to make them as effective as possible is to plant your Blue Hubbard squash earlier. You can see that they are larger here on both images. They're larger. They're going to attract the bugs a little bit more, and they're going to ideally stay on the perimeter and not go to your chosen crop. Now you can choose what you want to do with those trap crops. You can spray them, you can till them under, you can cut them out, you can crush the bugs there, do whatever you want, but at least here we're looking at this. This is where you're typically going to find most of the insects. They're not going to want to go over to your other plants. So it's literally trapping them at where you know that they're going to be. Non-chemical options. So again, for my cucurbit growers, there's kind of some main ones that we tend to run into. These are probably all the public enemies right here. Cucumber beetles being a key one. So you can see this is a striped and a spotted version. The spotted versions do tend to be a little bit larger, tend to come out a little earlier in the season, but not necessarily. And then the striped ones, they're both bad, unfortunately. They both basically do the same harm. They do look a little different. How can you avoid these without any chemicals? Removing crop debris, planting late. When I say late, I'm looking at like June 15th, which I know is pushing it pretty late. Some of these shorter varieties you can still get a harvest in. Hand picking where you can, rotating crops if possible, and then looking at yellow sticky traps. I almost find what works out better than the yellow sticky traps is the flowers. If you look in a flower, odds are early in the morning, those cucumber beetles are going to be in that flower. You can literally just remove that flower if it doesn't have a little squash or pumpkin below it, and you can basically crush it. That's a great way to remove a lot physically. Is it the best way to do large scale? No, but it's a great little scout to kind of look at the flowers because a lot of times you'll find them there. They do hatch at night, it seems like, so keep that in mind that they can be active at night when you maybe aren't scouting. Squash bugs, as we can see here, all the different stages. This is, of course, the adult, the eggs, and then the nymph stage. Delay planting again, because these are large, about coming up where like an inch long, particularly the adults. Row covers can be a great way to kind of act as a physical barrier. Direct planting in early months. Avoid the overwintering of squash bugs, seeking host plants, kind of a little break in the season there. Removing of the egg clusters. Watch out also for walking boards or any sort of wood you have near the field, any storage crates. They really like to reside in that wood over winter. Wake up in the summer, boom, there's your crops. Very easy for them to find. And then, of course, rotations can help break the buildup of them in an area. Squash vine borer. This is the difficult one. You can literally inject BT into the vines because, as the name implies, it is a grub inside the plants. It bores into the plants. So the moth comes through here, lands usually midday, when it's bright and sunny and warm out. They come in, they land, they lay an egg, they fly away. That egg hatches, and it basically starts eating its way into the plant and continues to eat its way through the plant. So unfortunately, not really a great way for contact fungicides because it's really hard to see on the outside. You can physically remove the infected area. You'll see this frass, which is this kind of tea, orangey, tannish kind of color material, basically the breaking down of the tissue as those grubs are going through and eating. You can also try to bury and cover some of the vines to reduce the areas that they have access to. However, they still can get into the leaf petiole, drop down, and get into your plant, which of course is not good. So we're kind of hopefully around that transplanting-ish time, or hopefully just a little bit ahead of it for you. What can you do to try to put this in the best odds to your favor so you're not having any negative effects? And might seem a little rudimentary. I don't know how many growers do this, but you plant and you water. So hopefully you're doing that. Sometimes I think growers just forget. They're so busy on planting. They get to the end and like, now I'm done. Well, you still got to go back and water. And that can be with a hand watering can because they're very small, or just remember to turn your drip tapes on. You also want to check the soil to make sure that it's not too moist or too dry. But that early season, that first planting, you can go a little on the heavy side, overwater them a little bit. That's the one time it's okay because you want to ensure full saturation. Pull out some of that air. They still need to breathe a little bit. Pull out some of that air because they went from whatever nice environment you had them in to now out in the field. And again, it could be silk roses. Drip irrigation would be much preferred. It could even be overhead. So I'd rather have you get some water to the plants than no water just because, oh, overhead, that's not good. Yeah, is it the best? No, but is it more effective than nothing? For sure, yes. What do we want to protect our plants from? Well, we want to protect from the below ground. We also want to protect them from the above ground, the transplant shock. We want to harden them off. This is a plant that went from like a greenhouse right to the outside, and you see that burning crispiness to the leaves. Not good. Some shading is great. Putting them outside before they go into an area, great way to, again, help reduce the potential for issues. Watching the temperatures. Last night it was a lot colder than I thought. I was supposed to 47 to 50. Well, I saw 40 degrees first thing in the morning. And so as a result, be mindful that sometimes the weather is a prediction. It's not always necessarily correct. Wind protection, particularly this year. Well, yesterday was blowing like crazy here, locally in southern New England, and that wind protection, preventing them from getting knocked over or breaking the area or whipping back and forth, all are those great ways to reduce those chances at early season damage. When I say support, yes, stakes would be a great thing, but this little Florida weave, this little basket weave system is probably great. Do you need to do this many? No. But when you first transplant them, like, oh, they can support themselves. Well, they're in the greenhouse, so any wind really causes them to go side to side. Particularly if you have grafted plants, that can act as a weak point and that can cause it to break, which of course would not lead to a very happy grower because your plants would essentially be dead for the season. Not a good thing. How much do you stake the plants? Maybe every other plant, every 2 plants, every 3 plants, depends how big and tall and strong your stakes are. Tallness is key, strength is key. The wooden stakes usually break, particularly at the end of the season when you go to get them out of the soil. Careful of metal stakes, don't run them over with the tractor, that can cause issues. Making them bright on top, spray painting them is advised so you don't lose them. And you see the basket weave system here, basically going on one side of the plant, going down, turning around, going down the other side of the plant. So basically you're preventing it from blowing either way the wind goes. Record keeping and adjustments, again, log those observations. Adjust based on the scouting that you're seeing, consult experts, look at the weekly pest messages that come out to alert you, hey, we're seeing this, be on the lookout for that, kind of give you a little bit of a leg up on things, as well as your own records. Oh, on June 15th, I saw. On August 4th, I saw. Can kind of give you an idea what to expect the following year. Keeping in mind this year, things might be a little behind, which is okay. Look at your records, and then you'll kind of know when things are expected to come in. Long-term planning, again, this is done, I say, more in the winter. Your crop rotations, your variety selections, and your soil health rotations. So think about those 4 field ideas if you can. Variety selection. Oh, I've got a lot of fusarium. Oh, these varieties are great at anti-fusarium. I've got a lot of blossom end rot. Well, here's 3 varieties that they can recommend to you that may be less susceptible to that. And then soil health, as always, that rotations will help your plants. It'll also, of course, help the soil overall. Common mistakes to avoid, again, overwatering, neglecting support, planting them and kind of walking away, over-fertilizing. Oh, they need nitrogen, they over-add. That's not a good thing. Ignoring early problems by your own fault or not, getting tied up with other things. I know we're busy this spring season. Planting too deep or too shallow. Too deep with tomatoes is not necessarily a problem unless you're using grafted plants. So you always want to make sure the graft union is at least about a 2-inch gap above the soil so no adventitious roots come out. Because you plant this below the graft union, this top part, the scion it's called, the top portion, will root. And there's no point of having the graft because you're not getting any advantage from the rootstock. So keep that in a high and dry area, something you can keep an eye on, I would say at least 2 inches above the soil line. Lastly, what can I leave you with tools and scouting guides and charts and general recommendations? University and extension resources. You know, I'm not going to be partial and say you have to use UConn. Use other sources, Cornell, California. Great ways to kind of look at. I provide you links. Look at what images they have. Look at the same thing from Cornell, which is New York based. Look at the same thing from California, which is of course California based. Look at Connecticut. See what kind of regionality specifics you might be able to correlate. As always, I'm going to say, you know, University of Connecticut here, Cooperative Extension. We've got some fact sheets out. They have a hot topic list here. So if you're into seed starting, they just posted this, giving you information about seed starting. Again, best for Connecticut Northeast, but could be applied if you're listening from somewhere else. Great things to kind of look at. We have new fact sheets coming as well this growing season, so be on the lookout for those. All the latest problems and updates to some of the old ones to make sure you have the latest and current information. If you're more of a book or print guide person or want something on the shelf, you can go pull. These are some great resources. They tend to be a little more costly because you want high quality images because you want to be able to see what you're actually, you know, going through and diagnosing. So here's some resources here. Again, there's online retailers you can also get them from. Try to get a reputable source here. And these compendiums can be a great resource. We've got the county extension offices for extension. There's a whole bunch of different, you know, local, state, federal areas. So keep all of these in mind. The reason why they're shown as gears here is they all kind of interact, maybe not directly in every day, but they're all kind of feeding the same system. They're all really put in place really to help the growers because you're so busy out in the field going through and doing all that finding, but reporting it to us can let us know. We had late blight occur several years ago, and that came through basically growers wanting things diagnosed and sending it to stations and kind of passing that idea around. So keep all these things in mind because they all, as it's shown here, work together, and you're kind of at the main theme here. But the goal for all these extension offices is to be able to help you. And if I can't answer you right away, I'll try to go out, do my research, call my resources, do my own research, look at what resources I have, and try to give you at least a suggestion of how to go forward with that. And with that, I know that was a lot here of our kind of beginning of all of our preseason kind of wonderful ideas. But again, thank you for listening and watching. Hopefully this was helpful. If we do future ones, we might refer back to these. So keep that scouting in mind. Keep an idea of what to look for. I'm sure Shuresh got some kind of closing words here to end with, but just want to thank you for the ability. I know it's a lot. I know it's a lot of information. I know I'm a quick talker. Try to get through, get you all the information that you kind of need, that quality resource here, so you can hopefully have a successful season, no matter what the season brings, because I don't know what's coming this year. I say, talk to me in October. I'll tell you what you should have focused on. Every year is a little different, but there are some similarities. And if you make a mistake one year, that's fine. Document it. Hopefully, don't make that same mistake going forward.
Thank you, Matt. That was great. A lot of information. I would just like to point out we have New England Vegetable Management Guide as well. That's put together by vegetable extension and research folks in New England. So that's a great guide. It has up-to-date list of pesticides, insecticide, fungicides, herbicides, registered for New England region. If there is, for example, some pesticide Connecticut is not registered for, it will say in the guide. So that's a great resource to have. And I would also like to put a disclaimer that the commercial product that were mentioned in the presentation is for information only, and it's not intended for approval or endorsement. So, and as Matt pointed out, label is the law. If there is some discrepancy in the label and the information shared, you must follow the label. With that, I would again like to thank you, Matt, so much for putting together so helpful material here. We will include PDF of the slides where you can click those links. With that, I'd like to wrap this up. Again, thank you so much for watching, everyone, and thank you, Matt, for being here.
You're welcome. Best of luck this year to everyone.
Yeah, bye.